Hello, I'm Ginger Conlon, Editor-in-Chief of One-to-One Media, and I'm here with Stephen Thurlow, the Chief Technology Officer of Sword Ciboodle. And we're going to be talking a little bit today about taking a process approach to the customer experience and how that can help an organization improve its customer experience and grow its bottom line. So welcome, Stephen.
Hi, Ginger.
Thanks for joining me today.
Pleasure.
So my first question really is pretty straightforward. So how do you define taking a process approach to the customer experience, and why is that important for organizations today?
Yeah, and that's a great starting point. I think in terms of a process approach, I would say there's two kind of areas we're looking at. One is just a whole way of thinking, which is looking at actually working out what the wider process is, that rather than saying that this phone call or this order or this delivery was interacting with the customer experience, it's actually looking at the whole process that the customer sees it as, because the customer sees that process as one thing. They don't see it as lots of different things. They've really got one goal in mind, which is to get their product fulfilled or their service fixed or whatever it is the engagement is for. They've got a goal in mind. And I think only by looking at it as a whole process and how it's resolved and what success looks like for the customer that's the only way that you can properly embrace the whole thing and not look at it piecemeal. So we firstly, a whole way of thinking, and secondly, a way of implementing and delivering. So rather than saying just, well, we're going to analyze these processes and make some nice diagrams and documents and then go and do some software, actually looking at how a software platform can take those processes directly and refine the detail in them so that it can execute them and measure them and refine them over time. So the process approach looks at both of those things, and I think it's the only way you can really engage with the dynamic and holistic approach that you need for customer experience.
Right. Yeah, you make a great point about what success looks like for the customer, because I think, to your point, it doesn't stop at that one touch point. It continues through the process. And I think that innovation ties really closely into that, right? Because you need to think differently about your processes. So how does a process approach then help companies innovate?
Yeah, and innovation is really interesting in the whole kind of customer experience world, because I think a lot of key innovations these days are actually about the experience and not just about the product, because products become commodities very rapidly. But if you join up either a number of products and systems and things that interlock, you create an experience that's quite different. And I think if you create an experience of dealing with your company, that's one of the areas where innovation is really valuable now. But the key thing is that you have to keep doing it. Innovation is a constant pressure in the customer-facing world. And I think the process approach really encourages that innovation, because it just challenges you to think differently. It challenges you to think a little bit out of the box, challenges you to ask the questions of, why am I doing it this way? What else could I do? And it really enables you to shift the base assumptions and make that paradigm shift, which is what innovation really is. I mean, there are some ways you can use process just to continually improve what you do, but really there's that way of actually saying, well, how differently can I do it, or why do I do it this way, or what are the best ways of doing it? And you can actually use it to get that paradigm shift and to embrace the innovation that you need. And by continually looking at that, then it can encourage that innovation over time.
Right. And I think that's a key point that you just made too, is the innovation has to be continual. And I think especially in this market, companies really need to be agile and keep being able to change as things increase.
Agility is one of the key things that the kind of process approach to implementation brings in, because it's not just a way of thinking, but it's actually a way of implementing. So by putting in more of a platform that actually you can change the processes within that without having to go through whole major software deliveries to actually get the processes to change, you can actually embrace that agility. And we find companies, even in the last 5 years, the level of engagement with customers and the way they engage and the expectations that the customers have has changed significantly. And really that's a constant acceleration over time. So that agility is key, and actually process encourages you to use the bits of the systems at the point of need to deliver the experience the customer wants. And by really tweaking and changing and innovating the processes quite rapidly, you can continue that agility without having to change the underlying systems at the same speed. And I think that's one of the key things. You have to enable those different speeds of change, that the front edge, the customer edge, has to be the most dynamic. And perhaps the core, such as your billing or your accounting system, it will change, but more slowly. And we find the process front end is able to adapt to that dynamic much more easily.
And that reminds me of something we were talking a little bit earlier, and it seems to tie in pretty closely together, about taking that holistic approach. How does that relate to the customer experience and help enhance it?
Yeah, and I think it comes down to actually that the customer's value set is perhaps different to the organizational model of how things are delivered. So quite often an organization is broken down into departments or silos or roles of responsibility by channels. but the customer really doesn't care. The customer's really got a single challenge there. By looking holistically, you can look at how to improve it. So what can I do now that improves the overall value of that equation, of that process over time? So to be able to say, what information can I gather now, or how can I make decisions that are differently now, or what expectations can I set now that down the process can be fulfilled? Whereas I think if each participant in the process is focused on simply doing their bit without any visual, any thinking about the wider process, then the expectations get misset. It's not my problem. The ownership goes down. Whereas I think by actually looking at the whole process and perhaps owning that from cradle to grave, so to speak, as an organization, you can actually significantly enhance the customer experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we were saying, the customer expects once they buy something that through the whole process it's going to be that consistent experience, and it's all one unit, not just this product here and this problem over there. And
very much so.
Of course, then that brings to mind the many challenges of getting the organization to work holistically. So what are some of the challenges you're seeing? And
I think that's right, because this is where the rubber hits the road on some of this. And some of the key challenges are really trying to bring those different stakeholders together to get them to provide that combined ownership. And some of that has to really be driven from the top, because if each department and silo and channel is driven with its own metrics that don't reflect the overall process or the overall value of the customer experience, then they're going to focus on those measures that they're targeted on. And to change that, you really need to get some incentive from the top, and you really need to start looking at how you can break down the mindsets that are there, and really just paint a bolder vision of what it could look like and what it should look like, and really pull those people together for the stakeholder, the various stakeholders, to be able to deliver for the customer. And one of the key things there is you start small. You don't try and do everything all at once. You start small, and by doing a key improvement, you actually start to create a champion mindset of saying, well, we did that, what can we do over here? And this was successful, how can we apply those ways of thinking and those techniques over here? And quite quickly, you get a different culture of how to put things right, rather than everyone arguing for why it wouldn't work. The silos are key, the channels are key, but somebody has to be responsible all the way up to the top for looking after customers as holistic entities, rather than simply looking at operational targets for individual systems.
Right. So then, how would a company get started as far as defining what success would look like in this, using a process approach to improve the customer experience?
The approach encourages you to ask that question, not just on the macro level. I mean, you can look at the big level and say, well, I want to reduce my customer churn, or I want to increase the lifetime value of my customers, and those are all good metrics that the process approach will help you get to. But I think in each individual case, you're saying, well, what's the purpose of this process? What is valuable about it? Because quite often there's a mismatch between what is valuable to the customer and what it costs the organization to deliver. And actually, by aligning those up, you can actually get measures that map onto the customer's success. So in terms of the measures, I mean, that might be, for example, things like first contact resolution. Why should the customer have to contact again, rather than getting from a single contact everything that they asked for to be done? And if you look at some of the customers that work with kind of very high value clients, then they will often even record calls and play them back, because actually they're so interested in making sure the customer doesn't have to phone again. But those principles of doing it right first time are just as valid for every customer as they are for the very high value ones. So that's an example measure that you can look at the customer experience and say, in this case, I just want them to contact once. And if it takes time, I want the expectations to be set, I want the expectations to be managed. So the actual measures can be set per process, or per business line, or per customer segment even, in terms of what's there. And I think the key thing about the process approach is it gets you to ask that question of, how will I know when I've done this right? How will I know what success or failure looks like? Because it's also true we can learn a lot from failure. Mm-hmm. And exceptions and defects are often one of the places you can study to learn things about how you improve the base process. And I think one of the key things there is asking for each business scenario, what does success look like, and defining the measures along with the process. And then when you implement that, the system is there to record those measures for you and feedback and aggregate those back into the system, so that you actually get a picture of what success means for the customer.
One of the things that I just wanted to mention was that you and Don Peppers actually talked more about this topic in detail in a webcast called Take a Walk in Your Customer's Shoes, and covered some additional issues like employee engagement and
employee
data,
culture and other things,
and how that all fits in. So, for those of you who are interested in some more of the details, go ahead and check that out on our website, one-to-one-media.com. And Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.